So I just want to go through some basic stuff to help me and the audience understand what we're about to talk about a little bit more when it comes to the black budgets and stuff like that. So a lot of these companies that, you know, are part of the military industrial complex, if you will, I've had a lot of experience with Lockheed, with Raytheon, with these types of companies. Let's start with Lockheed Skunk Works.
So there are compartmented operations at the Lockheed Skunk Works dealing very specifically with this area of technology, which has nothing to do with rockets, jets, conventional aerodynamics. And it has to deal with electrogravitics, which is the ability to create a very high voltage system that causes a electromagnetic field propulsion. So there's almost like an electromagnetic field bubble around an object. It can levitate, lift, and it can go, you know, Mach 300 and never have a sonic boom and no heat on the outer section of it. I think that these sort of operations, as Eisenhower warned, you know, have just gotten out of constitutional legal oversight. So I call those the illegal secret government projects. But those are in the Lockheed Skunk Works. So there's facilities out in the desert. If you go out to the Mojave Desert, there's a facility and an underground opening. So the really sensitive facilities are all in underground skiffs or DUMBs, deep underground military base facilities. And that whole area of California is like a beehive connected underneath with tunnels.
Okay.
I know where they are. I know people who've worked in them.
Are those all Lockheed?
No, because those are actually built by Bechtel Corporation or HIT Construction. So you'd have a connecting tunnel between, say, Edwards Air Force Base and Nellis Range. And you never have to go above the surface. So I'm very familiar with these and where they're located, and I've debriefed a number of guys who've been on them. This is why the Senate and the House are moving quickly. We were providing enough information that they now realize that this is real, that the UAPs, UFOs are real, and they're beginning to realize that a bunch of them are ours, but they're being used in deceptive indications and warnings, meaning false flag operations. Raytheon has a very, a certain type of them. Usually they're trapezoidal or triangular. My uncle worked for his whole career at Northrop Grumman. They have ones that are large, triangular, and other shapes. But so many of these objects that people think they see a UFO, well, it's a UFO to them because they don't know how to identify it. So one of the things we're doing is juxtaposing an interstellar vehicle, an extraterrestrial vehicle, with a man-made one, and what are the characteristics and differences.
How many people do you estimate are on these programs within these different companies?
Well, there are thousands. The problem is that when you're first trying to find out about this, the amount of information, like we're sitting on 8, 9, 10 terabytes of data in my archive that we're trying to organize. We call it the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, the DPIA. And that's what we're putting and organizing and handing off. As soon as we get it to any state and new information, I hand off another hard drive to these top secret guys who are trying to find out. But we need to pick up the pace, obviously.
When you're talking about these disinformation agents, these NOCs, I have somebody that comes to mind, and we were talking about him at lunch. Lou Elizondo. Is he one of them?
Oh, of course. I mean, you know, as soon as he emerged on the stage, I had a very senior guy at CIA who's worked this issue since 1979 contact me about that problem. But remember, the only way that you can control at this point all this coming out because of what we have and what we're pushing forward through media is to control the narrative, the spin. So the people coming forward who get an all-access pass on to, say, 60 Minutes or something like that, are people cleared by this same illegal, corrupt organization because they'll tell the public, yes, the UAPs are real, but we don't know what they are. Well, this is an absolute lie. We absolutely know what they are. Some of them are ours, man-made, and are confused quite frequently with the others, which are of extraterrestrial origin, or ETVs, extraterrestrial vehicles. And those operatives are taught very well to take an issue, grab it, capture it, and then spin it in the direction that they want. Now, the direction they want is endless ambiguity. Gee, we don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. It's nonsense. We've proven what they are. Well, I have 755 whistleblowers. And as you know, Mr. Herrera, the Marine who was at our conference, who I think you'll be speaking with soon, he came across such an operation. He initially thought they were transporting in this man-made UFO drugs. They certainly had weapons, illegal weapons that they were distributing. But those crates that our forensic aerospace artist drew, or we had a NOC who was there, who had been involved in an operation after that. And those were transporting children and women and certain men who had certain capabilities that would be used in experimental projects here and in other countries. It's a monstrous program. There's a man who lives right near here who was a CIA operative and was very young, was one of these victims of this. And he wants to come forward, but he's quite frightened. He's already signed affidavits about it. But there's a CIA black site 160, not far from Nashville, that was involved in some of these operations, mostly drugs and drug running, but also trafficking.
So it's a human trafficking operation. It's part of Stargate.
Yeah, but you have to understand what it's for. It's not for, shits and giggles, excuse me. They're used in very specific operations, and they're selected for certain capabilities, particularly psi capabilities. Now, keep in mind, this is also, there are a lot of operations that are related to this. Recently there was a whistleblower came out talking about the aliens murdering humans, and he was referring to a case that I know for a fact were our operations, these illegal secret government operations that were down in South America, and they've done it in Africa also, where they have killed innocent people in villages to make it look like an alien attack. I want to word this very carefully. A little knowledge is an extremely dangerous thing here, because this is a hall of smoke and mirrors and deception, and you have to then wind this back. What would a clandestine operation have if unsupervised since the late 1950s, where they've had some of the most brilliant scientific minds I've ever met working these projects? They've had almost an infinite amount of money, trillions of dollars that have gone into the R&D, studying both human breakthroughs and also extraterrestrial vehicles, propulsion systems, communication systems, material science, what things are made of, how they're made. Well, you figure after 80 years of that and trillions of dollars, you're going to have some payoffs. And these payoffs are in the form of advanced technologies, and ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles that are the man-made ones, but also this whole area of nanobiotechnology, consciousness and mind interface technologies, all manner of weapon systems that are what are called scalar or longitudinal, go faster than the speed of light. Most of the people in the military, CIA, special operations, corporate, what have you, who work in that world are not part of some vast conspiracy. It's incredibly tightly held. But in my view, that's their Achilles heel. By definition, it has to be kept pretty small, pretty tight, which makes them vulnerable if, we'll get to this later, if the U.S. government actually has the will to go the distance to get this under control. And they need to get it under control fairly quickly because it's getting out of hand.
Let's talk about Project Bluebeam. Mm-hmm. Can you describe what that is?
Well, that's another subculture term that's been attached to a series of projects that involve what the Pentagon, what they call a deceptive indication and warning, or a false INW, which is a false flag. And it's the ability to stage, through very advanced technologies, an alien attack or an alien event. And it's a whole series of them. Now, what most people don't know about, since late late 50s, early 60s, like the Barney Hill case and all that. Those were all human assets abducting innocent people made to look alien. And so that psychological warfare was authorized in 1953, 54. 1954, we mastered gravity control. So we started deploying these assets to begin to condition the public that there's a scary threat from outer space. So what their whole purpose is to create sort of a global militarized totalitarian superstate of the world fighting another world. It's like War of the Worlds. And that's been a 70-year defense plan. And I know people who've seen that plan. Carol Rosin saw the plan, who is Werner von Braun's spokesperson, who's on our team. And she's almost 80 now, but brilliant mind. And, you know, when she realized in the 70s that this was what was afoot, her whole life was devoted to trying to get some of these projects under control. But we're little David's up against an enormous Goliath. And, years ago in 93, I was at the Wrigley Mansion, and I'll tell you, Shawn, it was a very interesting meeting. It was like late at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and it was a conference room full of suits. And they approached me, and this is the fall of 93, just before I briefed CIA Director Woolsey. And they said, look, you don't need to be talking. They knew all about this meeting that was going to happen. And you don't need to be talking to the president and the CIA director about this. They don't know anything, and they're not going to know anything. If you want to know, you talk to us. We're the WFO. We're the work for other contractors. We're the people who are working on these technologies and doing the technology transfer. And then they were trying to convince me to side with what they were doing. And I said, no. I said, this is a corrupt enterprise. And then he says, you're a doctor, you can take out as many credit cards as you want. We'll zero them out each month because we run the supercomputers that back up the entire banking system. And we can get an infinite amount of money through certain techniques. And so we'll just zero them out. I said, then you're going to own me, aren't you? Because isn't that credit card fraud and banking fraud? He says, no, we're just trying to help. You see how these... This is an absolutely true story. He put me under sodium pentothal lie detector. But at the end of it, he said, look, we have given at least, now remember, this is 30 years ago. We have given at least 10,000 people $10 million apiece or more to secure their cooperation with this project.
Wow.
And that was 30 years ago. Now, money is no object if you're printing the stuff up and you're running drugs and you're trafficking and you're siphoning off from the legitimate black budget, which there is a legitimate black budget that's overseen by the president and the key people in the Congress. We're totally legitimate. But a lot of money from that is siphoned off and is through overbilling to the government into these illegal projects. It's absolutely embezzlement. So we can prove this, by the way, and I have people who've seen it happen. It's like the show Stranger Things. I've never seen it, but that's based on some weird stuff that went on at Montauk on eastern Long Island, the Montauk projects. And we know what those are. I know guys who've been in laboratories where they have a toroid or one of these devices, and suddenly they're pulling in spooky-looking creatures that look like they came out of the ninth ring of hell, and they literally become 3D and are running around the lab. Weird stuff. All right, so the high end of the WSFM is this sort of thing. But that can be used in a deceptive indication and warning. It can be used in a way that everyone on planet Earth would think that it's alien, and it isn't.
So with the different dimensions, there's another dimension in this room right now, and we just can't...
Within this room, folded, it's the enfoldment, it's quantum entanglement. So, what Einstein called the spooky effect, where the same particle be in two places at once. Mm-hmm. But visualize that at every point in space and time, at this level of quantum entanglement, you have access to any other point in space and time, but also these other dimensions, up to and including the most rarefied, what some people would call the conscious being, the unbounded consciousness. It's all folded within this in what I call the real cosmology, understanding the cosmology, which is way beyond astrophysics, current astrophysics. But But I think that's the part of this where when you start experimenting with and reverse engineering an extraterrestrial vehicle, their communication systems are not based on the speed of light like our cell phones, right, or video. They're based on this understanding of the cosmos because they've lived for millennia in that understanding. And so this is why, we talk about the fact that they have technologies that interface with directed thought. I call it technology-assisted consciousness, and consciousness that assists the technology. So they can interface bioelectric field and thought, and they navigate the spacecraft. Those technologies have, the good news is we understand them, and they could be used to great purpose on Earth. Energy generation, healing, all kinds of things, medical. But right now, they're in the hands of the worst group of sociopaths that have ever lived, and they dwarf, by far, Stalin or Hitler in terms of their intention and their capabilities way beyond. This to me is, as a doctor, I tell people this is like a knife, or I can use a knife to put butter on my bread, or I can use it to slit your throat. Now, so technology is neutral. It's the consciousness and the intention of those who wield it, who have it. Mm-hmm. In this situation right now is the worst of all worlds. Ben Rich, the week before he died, told James Goodall, you heard him at our conference, one of the last men to talk to him. He says, anything that you've seen in Star Trek and can imagine, we've done at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And he said, not at Area 51, but at the desert base, the underground facility.
What are some of the 145 top secret facilities that you know about?
Well, everyone talks about Area 51. That's an old one. It's still operational. And particularly, S3, S4, Pahut Mesa, out in Groom Lake.
Are these in the U.S.?
Yeah, this is Nellis.
Okay.
That one. And that's operational, has been since the 50s. A more state-of-the-art one is actually in the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is in Utah.
Is this the one that you disclosed at the conference?
Yes.
I'm going to put a picture up of it right now.
And so that facility, there's something called the Avery sector, Avery, where there are these assets. There's an extraterrestrial vehicle that was being studied there when one of our witnesses, I think he was there in 2009, when that object had been downed. They're downed by these electromagnetic pulse weapons because the ET craft are completely electromagnetic. So, a kinetic weapon would not be so effective, missile or a laser. But an electromagnetic pulse or scalar weapon stuns them and they'll come down. Sometimes they crash, sometimes they're intact. If they're intact, then you have the whole thing to study. And that's where this man was in a facility where they had an entire intact one.
So they're downing these aircraft with basically a directed EMP weapon.
Yes, but are more sophisticated than the legal constitutional government would know about because you're going to add to normal EMP, let's call it a supercharged part of it that's scalar, what I mentioned before, where it's a point that goes out longitudinally without the waveform.
Okay.
So that's why, light propagates at 186,000 miles every second. These are not limited that way because it's a point that goes out straight line. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
So now you're exceeding the speed of light. But it can also be used for communication. And Tesla wrote about scalar waves.
So hold on.
Can be used for other.
This isn't a point A to point B line. It's not linear. It's not a linear weapon. If I shoot a gun, the bullet goes, you can see it.
Right.
And if I shot a laser, you could see it, travel from point A to point B. Are you saying that these weapons do not?
Well, they go from point A to point B, but bypassing linear space-time.
If I was to use one of these energy weapons, let's just say from me to you, 6 feet apart, and I use this energy weapon at the exact same time to an object that's 75,000 miles away.
It'd be the same time interval.
It would be
Take the same amount of time.
It would be the exact same amount of time.
Right. Is all about 100 years of these sort of technologies that have been sequestered and confiscated, and how, if they were disclosed, we would have a civilization well within your baby's lifetime. Before he's in high school, we'd have a world with no pollution, no poverty, and no energy issues.